everyone. It's been a while since I did a solo interview. I kind of got carried away doing a bunch of panels, but today I'm very excited for our guest today because we did a panel together months ago, and since then I'm like, oh, we definitely need to do like an individual one and talk about this. And then I got really busy and kind of forgot about it, but now it's happening. So you want to introduce yourself real quick
Hey,
to our
I'm Shirley
audience?
Shani. I'm an associate marriage and family therapy in Georgia. I'm a PhD candidate with National University, and I'm a certified thanatologist, which is probably what we're going to talk about today.
Yes. So, grief. I think it was actually quite recently that I learned that there's different types uh, or different things that can cause us grief.
hmm
But before we get into that, how did you get interested in just like grief or death and dying and sort of like discussing that with clients?
So, most people in our profession, I think, get into what they experience. And I experienced grief, and I experienced how the society we're in, the culture we're in, doesn't really want to talk about it, doesn't really want to address it. So of course I wanted to change that. And
Mm-hmm.
of course I made it. And then when it was when I was younger. So when I finally got into my bachelor's and master's, that was my idea, to take that and give space to people because they won't get it outside, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe, and that's a little, it's a little tall order, but maybe make a little difference, make a dent in that refusal to address grief in our culture.
That's very true. There is this because I feel like I'm like even in the Mexican culture, uh, there is a certain extent. If you're expressing too much grief, especially as an adult, that's when you're like, okay, you need to move on. You need to be stronger than this. That's usually the word that gets thrown around.
Yeah.
Either if you're showing no emotion or you're like, toughing it out, you're like very strong, a very strong person. Um, is that what you tell the people that you're working with, that they're very strong?
God, no. Uh, not like that. I don't like the definition of strong as someone who doesn't have emotion. I don't like it. And I think Brene Brown said it better than me. Well, better than anyone. She said, you need to be strong to be vulnerable. It's
Mhm.
easy when it's easy, right? It's when we're vulnerable that we need strength to be able to show it. So I will never encourage someone to hide their grief in order to seem strong.
Yeah,
Sometimes we need to do that. Sorry, sometimes we do
mhm,
need to because that's where we're at. But
mhm.
it will not come from, hey, you need to be strong. It will come from, okay, I can't do this at work. Maybe I should learn how to compartmentalize. And if someone comes and asks me to do that, that's a whole different story than me pushing toward
Mhm. I have this horror story
it.
from a therapist in Mexico. So now that training for in Mexico for therapists is completely different than it is here. But I I had like one of my family members went to to therapy for depression, I believe, and their therapist kept saying, "You need to cry. You need to cry in session right now. Cry right now." So is that what your sessions are like?
Again, God, no. I do my very best to never tell people what to do. I mean, excluding my children, I tell them what to do. But that's like, put your plate in the dishwasher, stuff like that. But other than that, I do my very best to never tell people how they grieve. They know how to grieve. And it's different for each and every one of us. So who am I to tell you how to do it? I
so
don't have that authority.
so are you saying that there's like no right or wrong way to grieve?
As long as you're not hurting anybody, and that's including yourself, there is no wrong way. And there is absolutely no right way, which is more important because everybody asks me, am I doing it wrong? And the
Mm,
answer is because I don't know how to do it right. And I've grieved many times and I know how to do it right for me.
mm-hmm,
I don't know how to do it right for you. So who am I to tell someone? So if you're hurting yourself or another person, that's probably not the best way.
mm,
But other than that, I am not the expert on your life. So I am not the expert on how you should grieve or what you should do. I am an expert on therapy processes, but I'm not an expert on anybody else's internal process.
exactly. I always tell my clients, I always start with, because the way that I communicate with people easier for me is by giving examples or telling stories. So usually I will say, you know what, there was this one training that I had where um, the person doing the training said, when you're grieving, sometimes it's good to honor the person
Mhm.
that we miss. And she gave an example of how one of her clients would go and get like a milkshake in the anniversary of I think it's their father's death. And then so I say, well, if you have to come up with something for you, like for you to honor the person that they're missing or that they're grieving, um, like what would you do? Right. So I use it as an example for them to have an idea of what I'm trying to say. But they have to figure it out. I can't just be like, listen, you have to do this, and this, and then you're gonna feel so much better. Because then a lot of the times I ask questions to my clients and then they're like, I'm not really sure. What do you think? And I'm like, I don't know. Like I don't
Well,
know the answer either. Like we can figure it out together, but I don't have all the answers.
I don't have the answers. Neither, because first of all, the model I work with is a model that's based on questions because I know I don't know. And I
Mm-hmm.
have no problem telling a client that I don't know something.
Same.
And sometimes I do give examples and story, and I use TV clips to show
Mm,
something oftentimes, or use a song. But the thing is, you can honor your loved one by doing something you used to do with them and continue the bond. It's called continuing bonds, or
mm,
having a conversation with them. Once you know someone very well, you know what they would tell you. So you have this internal representation, that's what we call it, right?
mm-hmm.
And you can have a whole conversation with that person. It can be very helpful. It's
Mm-hmm.
also continuing bonds. And some people feel that they need to change whatever it is that they used to do because that person is no longer there. So we're coming on the holidays, right? Do
Mm,
I
yes.
continue the traditions? Do I change the traditions? Well, if it feels like it brings the person closer and you feel their spiritual presence or however you want to call it, great, do that. But
Mm-hmm.
if it brings you pain and you want to change tradition for that, who am I to tell you otherwise?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very personal, it is very individual. There is no one recipe that I can say here 3 times a day and call me in the morning.
Right. uh that's what I said. Like I tell all the people that I work with, I'm like, it would be just so easy, so much easier for us if we were able to do that, but we can't.
Right.
Because we don't, again, we don't have the answers, and everybody has a different way. Earlier you mentioned like how culturally in the US we just don't talk about grief, and in other cultures we have maybe different traditions that they have to
Mhm.
honor, uh, their loved ones. But so I think typically when we think about grief, it's usually someone's passing, right? Someone leaving us, like sort of like the ending of a relationship, but there is sort of like a person that's now missing.
Right.
What other um what other things can cause us grief?
So the bigger definition is the grief. Grief is the response to loss. So
Mm,
technically speaking, or not so technically speaking, every major loss in your life
mm-hmm,
brings a grief. It can be even something that you wanted to change,
mm-hmm,
but you had to lose something for it. When I immigrated from Israel to the US, I
mm-hmm,
wanted to do that, right?
mm-hmm,
But I also miss my friends. I miss walking the street and hearing Hebrew. I miss the radio. I miss a lot of stuff. I miss the food. God, I miss the food. But stuff like that. So the fact that I chose it doesn't negate the fact that I also grieved it. If it
Mm,
was important, then of course it brings grief with the loss. So it can be non death grief, which can be due to illness, it can be due to disability, and it can be due to any other major change that you made. Again, even if you wanted it, like immigration or parenthood. Nobody talks about it, it's taboo. But there is a grief in becoming a mother. There is grief
mm,
there because you lose who you used to be, your self identity, who you are, and now
mhm,
you're this. For a while, first of all, your only existence is to provide someone else's needs.
mhm,
And then you slowly regrow parts of yourself, but it's never going to be the same. And there is grief in that. We lose ourselves in that. And that's okay to say. Doesn't mean that we don't love our children or regret them. It can be the same time, right? I moved to
mhm,
the US, I wanted to do it, I can grieve at the same time. You separate from someone. You are the one who chose to separate.
mhm,
Still, you grieve that loss. So it can be any loss. So there is, when we talk about category, we usually talk death, non death, and then there is ambiguous grief. That's when the loss is not final. When someone is missing,
mm,
with the hostages that we have, because I'm still an Israeli, so I'm going to say the hostages are ambiguous loss, tremendous, unbelievably painful. Um, when someone has dementia and
mm.
they're there physically, but they're not there
Mhm.
emotionally and mentally. So all that.
That's true. I had a client quite recently lose a parent, and but they were sick for a very long time. And I think at one point I asked something about, well, do you miss your mom now? And she said, I think I grieved the loss of my mom a long time ago because she stopped being a mom
Yeah,
due to, like, her illness. She stopped being a parent. Um, and I think it's like just like the little things, right? Like if people change in some sort of way, it becomes sort of like an unknown person to a certain extent, even if it's a good change, right? Um, when I think the other thing, I think I want to focus a little bit on this because I think it's very important. Parents often feel it, but um, what's the word? But they feel shame for feeling
right.
it, right? Like the loss of their independence essentially, because now they have to care for a whole nother, human being
Yeah,
out there that really depends on them. And a lot of the times parents don't really go back to addressing their own personal needs. They stay in the role of I'm a parent now, right? And even, yes, you can be a parent, but you're also like, a wife and a daughter and, like a friend. But sometimes those things get pushed aside, and like my whole existence now is just I'm a mother. And I think we also like they also might experience this depending on the child's like developmental level, right? Because you get to do less and less for them as the children become more independent.
right.
And then we hear a lot about empty nest syndrome,
Which is
or
grief.
yes, or like parents who now have teenagers, and then they're kind of like missing that little kid boy that would listen to you all the time and will follow you around, and now
Oh,
it's
that
like
I
a
don't
totally
miss.
different person.
But I like teenage much more than I liked younger. But that's personal for everyone, right?
Yeah.
I think especially women are not allowed to say, I miss being me. I miss being
Hmm.
my own person. Um, and for women, it's also if you have a career and children, then if you pause and you attend to your children, then people say, hey, what's with the gap in your resume? Or they say, you neglected your career. And if you don't pause, then you're a bad mom. There is no way out, right? It's
Hmm.
at 22, you're always bad at something.
Mhm.
And the social expectation is to somehow not miss a bit anywhere ever. And that doesn't happen for us as
It's
humans.
impossible. It can't be
It's
all
impossible.
months. Yeah.
Yeah, the Barbie movie said it well. It's impossible to be a woman. So my point in this is we should be allowed to say it. It should be allowed. I should be able to say out loud, I love my children and I really miss being able to just register for a conference without any hesitation. Or I love my children and I miss just going to a show without needing a babysitter.
Mm.
It's okay to say that
Mhm.
you miss being your own person. That's fine.
Mhm. It's okay to say that you miss it, and it's okay to start doing it again.
It
Right?
is
It's okay to like get a
very
babysitter
important.
now
Yeah,
because
it's
now I'm
very
gonna go.
important
Mhm.
because when you start doing it again and you do it in increments, the more you can, the more you do it, then when emptiness, I'm not gonna ever say that emptiness is not gonna be grief for anyone and everyone. But unless you don't like your children, that's a whole different conversation that I am
True.
not going to have right now. I like mine, so I'm not in that position. But as long as you like and love yours, right? Emptiness is going to be grief, but it's going to be a little more tolerable if you have something of your own. Which brings me to say that essentially, grief is the loss of a part of us.
Mm.
Right? When we grieve any relationship, any place we've been, anything you put loss, right? It's
Mhm.
a part of who you are that you're grieving. So let's take a relationship. That person was part of my life and part of who I am.
Mhm.
Right? The place I lived in was a part of who I am. The place you lived in is a part of who you are. The culture you grew up in is a part of who you are. And some of it you can carry with you and some of it you cannot.
This is actually yes, okay. So I've never thought about it in the way, but it's so true because sometimes we even grieve like our own childhood, right?
Right?
I mean, most of the
I'm gonna
time
close
it's
this.
because we grieve the things that we couldn't get because of trauma or some incident happening. We usually miss that, but sometimes or a lot of the times I find myself like just telling my friends, be like, I wish I was a child again. So I know how to deal with like paying bills and then like all the things that I have to deal as an adult. um but yeah, that can be a type of grief, like just kind of like how parents may grieve, the previous developmental level for the child. We can do the same for ourselves,
Right.
right? Like we can grieve just our 20s or 30s, because I used to be able to do X, Y, and Z back in the day and not anymore.
and and everything you lose is a part of you.
Hmm.
And then that part is different now, and grief becomes a part of the puzzle that you are. Like
Hmm.
you said, people expect you to move on, get over it. We don't get over grief.
Hmm.
We learn to live with it, and it becomes a part of the puzzle that is us. It's part of who we are, right? So before that, until I was 18, I was my mother's daughter. Then I
Hmm.
was my late mother's daughter, and the grief for her loss, for her death, became
Hmm.
part of who I am. It's a
Hmm.
part that changes. It's not always the same. The intensity changes. The how much it hurts changes. But it's not that I'm over it and it's done.
Hmm.
It's different.
So what would you say, or what would be sort of like the top three things that you will always recommend for someone who is experiencing grief, just like in general, like as the first few steps towards um, uh, more like managing their grief? Because I don't think grief ever goes away. I think it just
It
sort
does.
of like changes over time.
So yeah. So first of all, know that it will not go away. It will change. Don't expect
Hmm.
it to go away. The other is be very attentive to what you need and what you want and what suits you, because everybody has an opinion, right? Pay
Yeah.
attention to the right way for you to grieve. How do you want it? How what suits you, and do
Hmm.
that, and then be able to say it out loud. Because if we try to hide our grief or try to hide what's right for us, then we don't do it. Then we don't give ourselves space, and we deserve the space.
Yes, that's one of the things that the way that I word it to the people that I work with is, um, you have to give yourself permission to do it,
Right?
because a lot of the times we hold ourselves back because I'm an adult, or I should be stronger than this, or it happened like 10 years ago, so I shouldn't be feeling this way, right? So we prevent ourselves. So we have to give, just like you create that space in therapy for people to come and talk about their grief, we have to do the same for ourselves,
Yeah.
right? um yeah. Is there anything that you have learned from, working with a wide variety of clients, that you're like, oh, you know what, that's a really good idea, I would try implementing that in my own life, or sharing it with a lot of other people, because it just sounds like really a good idea?
I think the thing I learned the most is say their name. Right?
Ah.
People don't want to hear. People don't want to mention. People are afraid that if they say the name, they'll
Mm.
remind you of your loss. So, A, no, you
Oh.
didn't forget. It's fine. They're not going to remind you.
Uh-huh.
Right? And B, it gives them space. It gives the relationship space.
So it's not a he who must not be named kind of thing, like we
No,
actually have
no.
to say.
It's Voldemort. Absolutely Voldemort. Although I do have an issue with JK, but that's a whole different thing.
Yes. We could have several panels dedicated to that.
That's a different form of grief.
Yes, yes, that's true. I did do a panel with a bunch of other panelists talking about grief in general, but more in terms of fandom, like
Right.
when our favorite character dies on screen, or our favorite show gets canceled. Like, is that like real grief? Because a
Yes.
lot of people are like, it's just a fictional world. I'm like, no, it's not. Not to me, right? Or like, again, like you said, it becomes a part of us, right?
Right.
Like our favorite character, the things that we do, watching, Saturday morning cartoons, or when I was in college, a friend of mine, and my roommate, we would used to watch the show every Wednesday, because that was when the new episode would come out, and that became sort of like a routine. We started bonding, and we watched two shows. One she chose, one I chose. Um, I could get interested in the show that she chose because I like talking to her and spending time with her. But by myself, I just like, I don't really care that much for the show. But I loved spending time with her. And then once that couldn't happen anymore because she moved out, um, it was sad.
Yeah.
um, but again, like, there's certain things that we can miss, and it doesn't make it any less real just because it's a fictional character or someone who like never existed.
So shout out to something that happened recently
Mm.
in a different podcast. For it's called "Call It What It Is,"
Uh-huh.
and they interviewed Kyler Lee, who played Lexi, who is now on the way on a show called The Way Home, coming to
Uh-huh.
the third season, and she was on Supergirl. She was Lexi Gray in Grey's Anatomy.
Mm.
I talked to her about Lexi's death, and she said she's okay with it. But at the time that the character died, many, many years ago,
Uh-huh.
it was the the internet was overwhelmed with
Uh-huh.
emotion, and people were talking about, I'm okay with that. I'm not, she deserved better. She didn't deserve better. All that, and
Uh-huh.
because of that podcast, people started talking about it again.
Mm-hmm.
And what I have to say is that this was a first of all, you if you love the character, it's like you want best for the character, like you would
Yes.
for any person you like or love,
Mm-hmm.
and so you want something good for them. And Lexi didn't get that good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So people got upset, and it's legit. That's because Lexi wasn't real. doesn't mean your grief is not valid,
Mhm.
right? And we have to remember that it's not as intense, I should hope, uh, but also remember that our brain doesn't necessarily separate real stimuli from imaginary stimuli. So when our favorite character dies, it takes our mind, not our physical brain, to know the difference. So the first neurological response is going to be, oh my God, someone just died. And
Mhm.
then your mind will come in and remind you, hey, it's not a real person, right? But your first neurological response is the same. Your physical brain cannot differentiate. Try imagining biting a lemon. What happens to your mouth?
It starts like filling out with saliva.
Did you bite on a lemon? No, you
Yeah.
didn't. Because the neurology cannot differentiate.
That's so true because um oh wow. Okay, so I'll when I talk to clients sometimes I say, "Hey, listen, sometimes we know what's reality up here, but our heart doesn't follow." Right?
Right.
Like the emotions are still there, and
Exactly.
so we need to like learn how to manage the emotion because again, it doesn't make it less real.
Right.
Right?
And I'm not saying I'm Jewish. And in Jewish culture, we have the Shiva, the 7 days that we are getting to really mourn. Like
Mhm.
we're not supposed to cook or clean or even shower if you don't want to. Like you're just
Mhm.
grieving for 7 days. You're just mourning.
Mhm.
And I'm like, I'm not saying that we should have had Shiva over Lexi Gray or over the cancellation of Supergirl after 6 seasons or anything like that. But I am
Mhm.
saying we can't negate that it's still sad. We can't tell people, oh, it doesn't matter. If it matters to you, it matters.
I had a friend because okay, so this is part of what society sort of like pushes us to forget about this or to pretend that we're okay
Hmm.
because it doesn't give us the time to grieve.
Right,
I had a friend who was saying something along the lines of um, their job will give them, I think, like 2 days of like time off if for like a grandparent, but if it was like someone closer to them like a partner or a child, then they get a little bit more time, but then they still have to go back to work.
right,
Right. And there's places that don't actually do that and they're just kind of like, okay, well, you get the day off to go to the funeral or whatever services you guys are doing, but then the next day you have to be back
right,
here. And so that type of environment doesn't help us in any way to have a space to grieve, right?
right. Because grief is not productive in the capitalistic sense of the word, right? You
Mm-hmm.
don't make money, you don't spend money. And so the society that we're in, that's very focused on productivity and action items and money, pushes you to just, okay, you know what? You can do this on your own time. Now, I'm not saying that for you need to have a bereavement leave of a year, but I am saying bereavement leaves are important.
Mm-hmm.
And it should be depending on the culture and depending on what, and by culture, I mean the culture you come from, not necessarily the culture you're in.
Mm-hmm.
But it has to be recognized because people can't do the exact same thing while grieving. The brain changes. There is fog, there is emotion, there is, you forget more. The grief fog, it's called. You forget more. You're not as attentive. There is something cluttering your mind, and that's okay. So we have to be considerate of that. We have to take it into account. It's also exhausting to grieve. So you go to work and you have to what? Put 8 hours in, you barely have the energy for two.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I'm not saying we should throw in the towel and not go to work for a year, but I am saying we need to be a little more considerate.
and of ourselves, the people that we're working with, and if we are sort of like a boss,
Yeah,
we're having our own company or whatever, like we have to be more considerate of that as well, because just because it's not, I think this is something that I talk to clients about when it comes to um trauma. And I say, okay, well, everybody has a different view of it and a different experience. Something that was totally traumatic for me, like seeing a spider, would not be traumatic for someone like my friend who loves spiders and has a pet spider, right? So, like, it's not the same. So, if especially you mentioned living in Georgia, and I know you have natural disasters in the area, right? That occur. Do you?
I
I just
didn't
want to say.
experience them. I heard some people had them, but I didn't.
Right. So, well, like certain areas of the U.S., right, like Florida, they usually get them
Yeah,
every year, right? And for some people, it's like, well, yeah, what happens every year? Like, why are you grieving? Why are you like scared? Why are you traumatized? And I'm like,
because it
it's
happens every year.
exactly like you have no time to like recover from it, but also like just because you're used to it and you have like a home that's like very established and you're fully prepared for it doesn't mean everybody is, right,
Right,
or everybody's experiencing it in the same way that you have experienced it. So we can't really judge or other people's, because a lot of the times I have people come to me and they say, yeah, but my loss is not as bad as the loss of so and so,
right,
right? And I'm like, yes, but your loss doesn't, like, that doesn't diminish your own loss. Like,
right.
you're still grieving, you're still hurting, whatever happened, just because other people have more of a loss, or and they're handling it better, doesn't mean you should not be feeling it.
Yeah. And I think we should remember that it is, again, I keep going back to personal and individual,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, and we are different people at different times of our lives.
True.
So, what was right for me 20 years ago may not be right for me now. So, I'm going to give the example of um, 16 years ago, actually, December 1st, 16 years ago, I had a stillbirth. And I felt it was horrible, but I wasn't immediately out of it. I wanted to go back to work right away.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to my then boss, she's like, are you sure that this is what you want to do? Like, and
Mm-hmm.
I said, it's going to come back and hit me at some point, and I'll need you to give me this time then. Because right now I'm okay to function,
Mm-hmm.
but when it will hit me, when it comes back, I won't be able to. So I need you to give me that grace that you're willing to give me today when I need it. And she said, okay. And three
Mm-hmm.
months later, I woke up in the morning devastated, couldn't stop crying, called in and just took time off. The same time off she would give me then when
Mm-hmm.
I needed it. It was absolutely astonishing that she let me fully individualize my process. And that's the only way to do it.
But that makes me also so very sad, because that should be the norm.
It should have been.
It should be the norm. Um, yeah.
And then again, October 7, my husband is from one of the kibbutzim that was destroyed, and his father was murdered in the attack,
Mm-hmm.
and a quarter of the community was either murdered, kidnapped, or both.
Mm-hmm.
And so it hit very personal, close to home. And I called my workplaces, and I said, I can and I feel the need to do clinical work, so I'm going to continue to see clients tomorrow, but I can't do admin right now because admin feels stupid right now. It feels irrelevant
Mm-hmm.
right now. So I'm going to drop all the admins and you need to do all the admins and I will just do clinical.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm a very lucky woman because everybody said, okay. And I didn't touch a single bill. I didn't touch a single thing that wasn't clinical, which is
Mm-hmm.
seeing my client and doing the notes. That's all I've done for about a month. and
And
I still get paid, and they still did all the billing. Everything was still the same. I just didn't do it.
mhm. But you know what? I think there's the strength in you, right? Because you were able to advocate for yourselves, and a
Mhm,
lot of people, they're like, yeah, what the company says, this is the way to do it, right? So they go based on that.
mhm.
But a lot of the times, if we are honest and vulnerable and we're like, hey, listen, this is the only thing that I can handle right now, like can you help me, right? It really does. I want to, I want to see the best in humanity. So I'm gonna say that for the most part, it will help, right? And people are willing to to be there to support you when you need it. But if we never speak up, if we never say anything, then people are not gonna know.
Which is very hard when grief hits to find this ability to speak and advocate because again it's exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's when where we should come in as
Mm-hmm.
people who are as therapists, as humans who are currently, maybe currently, I don't know about you currently, I'm not in the midst of intense grief. So I can say, hey, we should listen. We should ask questions. What do you need right now? My
Mm-hmm.
favorite question is, what do you need right now? Not whatever you need, tell me, because that puts the onus on you to do the work, figuring out what do you need, call me, ask me, figure it out if it's okay to ask me, all that. No. What
Mm-hmm.
do you need from me that I can do right now in this moment? Does that require any thought? You can immediately answer
Mm-hmm.
and then do that. But it's up to us to advocate, to make it the norm.
I saw I think it's called New Amsterdam, that show, and in the very first um, episode, the new I think director of the hospital comes in, gets everyone, like all doctors and nurses and stuff, and then he just says, what do you need from me? And everyone's just kind of like, what? And then he's like, honestly, like I'll give you whatever you guys need, until like I think he was like one of the nurses that spoke up, and they were like, we need more nurses, or we need more of this, and he's like, done, I'll do it. And then I'm like, wait a minute, that's exactly how it should be, right? Like when we whether we are taking over like a leadership or become or we are like helping family members or whatever, that should be our first question, right? Like, what do you need from me? How can I help you? Because it becomes a help me help you help me kind of thing,
Yes,
right? Like it just it's so much helpful, because a lot of people, especially with what happened with the United Healthcare CEO quite recently, um, if there is more communication between the providers and the patients or the people receiving the services, and there is more willingness on both parties to sort of like understand, right? um, this could have been prevented.
and I think there is a difference between whatever you need, just call me, which puts all the work on you,
Mm-hmm.
or even what do you need from me? That's still, I am saying, what do you need right now?
That's true.
That's one. And the other is, if you have something that you're willing to do, just offer that. Be very specific. Hey,
Mm-hmm.
can I cook you a meal? Can I pick up your kids from school today? Can I do the laundry? Right? So you're offering something specific. So the other person doesn't need to consider if it's appropriate to ask or
Mm-hmm.
if it's within your ability. They don't need to do mind reading for you. You just
Mm-hmm.
tell them what you're willing to do for them, and then they can take it or leave it. So easy. Make
Mm-hmm.
it easy on the person who grieves. They don't need the extra work.
True. Because even that, like to us, is like, well, it's not that big of a deal, but it is, because, like you said, like there is like this fogginess happening in the brain, that even doing that sort of like mental gymnastics, it's exhausting for them,
It is. It
right?
is.
Yeah. I was kind of like really hoping you will mention this again, because you mentioned it in the previous panel that we
Yes.
did, and
Yes.
I have been talking to my clients about it ever since.
Just tell
So
me
I was
what
like,
it
yes, you
is.
need to mention it again because it is so important, right? Um, Especially when, because I think the what is considered to be the standard is for us to say, oh, just contact me. Whatever you need, we can help. And I'm like,
So
yeah,
much
but if,
work.
yeah, and I'm like, well, also, if they ask you for $10,000, are you gonna be able to give them $10,000? No. So
No,
we also have to be like honest in like, this is all I can give right now,
right.
right?
And
Yeah.
sometimes it's not just the $10,000. Can you pick up my kid from school tomorrow?
Mm,
No, I can't because I'm out of town. So hard when you're
mhm,
grieving. So be very specific. And one of the things I don't remember, I think I remember where, but I was in a conversation, they called it the lasagna syndrome. Everybody makes lasagnas and
mm,
brings lasagnas to the grievers. You may not even like lasagna. I mean, I do, but some people don't. I'm sure there are people who don't, right?
mhm,
Can you instead say, "Hey, can I make you a meal? What do you like?" Or can I make you a meal and then make a meal? Don't
mhm.
automatically bring the lasagnas. And then everybody does it the first few days. You don't have space in your fridge. But then a month later, you're still too exhausted to cook, but nobody's there anymore.
Because by then you should have gotten over it, right? Like that's what society is sort of
Right.
thinking. Like, you're an adult, it's happened, move on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, just be specific in what you're willing and make sure it's the right thing. Like, if you ask me, can I pick up your kids from school tomorrow when I'm grieving? The answer is still no, they're homeschooled. Right? So it won't be very helpful to me if you show up at the middle school and demand to pick up my kids because they're
Mm-hmm.
not there. Right? Make sure. Yeah, I have a friend who's allergic to beef,
Mm.
right? Can I make you a steak? Probably not.
But then now we're, because if we make sort of like the decision for them in that way, now we're kind of forcing them to be like, oh, thank you so much, I am never gonna eat it because I could die
You're
from
gonna
this,
bring it to my
but
house, I'm
thanks.
sure. Yeah. But
Yeah.
there is this in the last episode of the second season of Supergirl.
Mm,
Alex and Kara are standing on the balcony of the DO, and Alex says, "Do you want me to come over to stay over tonight? I can stay as long as you need me." And Kara says, "No, I need you to go be with your girlfriend. I need to know you two are happy."
mm,
Right? And it's asking and respecting the answer. And she says then, "What do you need right now?" Right? And I'm like, oh my God, I wish I could hug the entire writer's room, right? It's so accurate.
mm-hmm,
Now, sometimes the answer, sometimes we know the person is hurting themselves in the process, or, they're self-destructive in their
mm-hmm,
process. So yeah, we need to be able to come if we're very close to them, and it should be only be done when you're very close to someone. Say, hey, you're hurting yourself. This is not the best for you right now. But most often than not, people have opinions when they shouldn't.
um I think too, we kind of need to address sometimes, because if we were to say, hey, what do you need right now, we have to be prepared for the answer to be, I don't know.
Yeah, and therefore be also willing to offer something concrete.
Hmm. Usually, what I tell, because this is something that I learned from working with kids, which works with adults and anybody, is choose. Right? Okay, so you don't really know. Okay, we can work on it together. If you're too exhausted to do it, how about this or this? Because these are the two things that I'm able to do. Like, which one would you prefer? Right?
Right.
Because again, that we're limiting that decision, because anything you need is just so much, and it becomes very overwhelming. Right?
And it's also not true.
Yeah, I was listening to a comedian yesterday who was talking about how he finally understand why his wife says, oh, I don't have anything to wear, when she has like a full on closet and he only has like a dresser or whatever. Because he said that he sat in front of the TV and he wanted to watch something, and then he saw like he had like the paid cable, so he had like a bunch of different options, and then in the end he was like, there's nothing to watch.
Yeah.
And then like that's exactly it. Like if we're giving too many options, we just our brain just like fries, and then we're like nothing, like just, there's
Right.
nothing.
Right.
Yeah. Wait, there was another one. Is didn't even say no. uh and the the having opinions when it's not like our business, right? Like again, we can't tell people what to do, how to do it. But there, the exception I think is that I think we can give suggestions sometimes,
Yes.
because I think one of the hardest parts sometimes is for people to go up to you and say, hey, you are, self-destructing in this way. I don't think this is a very good way for you to process your grief. But then that's where the suggestion ends, and then we're left with, but how do I do it then? Like,
So
what am I supposed to do?
so I'm gonna go all the way back to Supergirl because I mean, why not?
Okay.
And in the first episode of the third season, Alex is exploding all over Kara because Kara self isolates to
Uh-huh.
the extreme.
Uh-huh.
And she tries to give her space touch with and then explodes, right? So
Mm-hmm.
first of all, don't explode. But the second is instead she should have offered, hey, can we just sit just the two of us? Right? I'm not
Mm-hmm.
gonna push you to go back to everything and the normal that before,
Mm-hmm.
but can we just have a sister's night? Because
Mm-hmm.
I listened to her exploding, and I'm like, "You're not coming to the bar. You're not having game night." And I'm like, "Girl, you're asking for too much." And I think one of my favorite grief shows is The Way Home, coming back for the third season in 2 weeks. I'm very excited. And one of the things that it's shown there is they show grief 20 years later.
Oh, okay.
And so you can see how it's still there, and life continued, and they built lives after, right? And so you see that it's not like, oh, I'm going to be stuck here forever. But it also didn't go away. They still talk about the loss. They still mention the person. They still miss the people. And one of my favorite moments is when they show continuing bonds. They show them imagining what that person would say, and it comes from someone saying, hey, you know what, if you really feel lost, ask them for their advice,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or do something that they shoot fireworks at the end of summer, like they
Mm-hmm.
used to. They didn't do it for 20 years, but now they're willing and ready to do that again.
Mm-hmm.
So all that to say, if somebody is doing something that you think is self-destructive and you have grounds for that, then start small. Offer something small. Don't say, "Hey, don't do that. Go to a party." It doesn't work that way, right? And yes, sometimes people who grieve will say, "I still want to go to a New Year's party." Also on the way home, I
Mm-hmm.
still want to go to the New Year's party, and you say, "No, you shouldn't." Yes, they should. Just make sure to stay close in case it doesn't work well for them.
Mm-hmm.
But respect what they're asking for.
Yeah. And also for the person who is grieving to know that, hey, if you're there for like 10 minutes and you realize this was a bad idea, it's completely okay for you to dip. You can
Yes.
just leave,
Right.
and that's okay. And
Yeah.
if people don't understand, then yeah, sucks for them.
Well, like
But
I said, everybody has opinions.
yeah. So one of the things that I thought we were gonna kind of get there, but we got
Yeah.
distracted as I usually do. But one thing that I really wanted to discuss with you was grief over political things that are happening. Now we kind of mentioned some things along the way, um, but I wanted to be sort of like more concrete because in November I had a lot of clients grieving for a couple of weeks,
Right.
very upset, very much like defeated. There's nothing we can do, and yeah,
Okay.
there was nothing they could
Let's
do,
dive.
right?
Let's dive. So first of all, political grief is real and valid.
Mm-hmm.
And in the literature, it is defined as understanding the system you live in is not going to serve you, or it's not going to serve you as well as it will serve others, or it is
Mm-hmm.
going to harm you, right? That's the definition. Political grief is not over, it's not my candidate. It's over now the system is going to work against me.
Mm-hmm.
That's political grief, is the understanding that it's going to hurt you because politics is very personal, right? For some people, it means, is my existence going to be valid? Or even, am I going to be able to exist as my authentic self?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So for trans people, this new system is not going to allow them to exist, period. And that's huge grief. It's not, my person or your person. This is like deep and personal,
Mm-hmm.
right? I hate it when people say politics should be therapy is not politics. That's not true because access to therapy is political. And what we're allowed and not allowed to do in the therapy room is political.
Mm-hmm.
And whether or not your insurance covers it is political. And the fact
Exactly.
and I all these things are political. So it is very deep and personal. But I want to also say, so first of all, it's valid and it's as personal as it can get. But I also want to say there is another type of political grief that we hardly ever talk about, which
Hmm.
has nothing to do with who won. And that's what happens when your own party slash camp slash group goes against you or
Mm.
doesn't represent your values the way you should or you want to. So I'm going to give an example on two ends.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of Republicans don't feel the current choice is representative of their values. They don't.
Mm-hmm.
And they're grieving that because now either I back up someone I don't want to back up, or I don't have political belonging anymore.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Right.
and there's also too the assumptions that are made because
Right.
if you had openly said which party you support, now I'm making a lot of assumptions about you,
Right.
right?
And
Yeah.
a colleague of mine told me that just being from the state that she's in, that's usually very Republican, everybody assumes all that just for being from there. And she's actually not any of the things people assume,
Mm-hmm.
but they assume already, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one problem. The other problem is, and the other example is for a lot of, again, I'm an Israeli, and a lot of people in my liberal camp think my country should not exist anymore,
Mm-hmm.
should never have existed because they can't fathom never mind, they can't fathom the complexity of it. And we're not going to dive into that. But they see everything in good guys, bad guys. Even comic books can do better now, but some people still can't.
It yes, and that's sort of like I feel like that's the root of the problem, right? Like we're
Right,
always in this sort of like black and white type of thinking.
right.
And again, all these assumptions just because the leadership of the country has decided to do X, Y, and Z, and you are very patriotic towards your country. Now I'm assuming things about you, and I'm like, no, that's not how any of that works, right?
But then I don't belong. So where do I belong right now? Where a lot of
Mhm,
Jews feel talked to me after the seventh and said, we don't know when we belong because we are progressive liberal, but
mhm,
right now they're all turning on us.
mhm,
So what am I supposed to do? Where do I belong? And that's homelessness. That's ideological
mhm.
homelessness. I decided that's what it's called, but it's ideological homelessness. And that's
No,
a
it,
different part of political grief that we never talk about.
yes, because that okay, so one of the things that I always talk about, especially when it comes to talking about why I created Psychology for Geeks, it's because I really believe that we all need to have a community. But
Right,
if our community, if we are in some way pushed away from our community, like you said, we are homeless. We have no one, we have no support, we have no roots, right?
right,
Because we can't, like, then it becomes a, I can't say I am very proud to be Mexican, and my Mexican ancestors did X, Y, and Z, and then so I'm following their wisdom. If Mexico is of over there doing some horrible things, and then people are like, "Why are you proud of being Mexican? Are you like completely agreeing with whatever they're doing?" And I'm like, "No, I haven't even lived in Mexico in a long time. Like, I can still be proud of like my ancestors and what
right.
they did, and I still want that community, and I still want the best for my people. Does it mean that I agree with everything that's happening? No.
No. And it's becoming so there these are different types of political grief, but it all connects. Because if you go back to the first type, the more common type, right? The system won't serve me, then I don't
Hmm.
belong in that system, right?
Hmm.
And if we look at that like that, then political grief becomes very logical because there is fear, there is loss in not just belonging, but security, safety.
Hmm. Yes.
I mean, it's all there. And so people have grieved, and rightfully so.
Now, my goal is to release this video mid January. It's December now when we are
Yeah,
recording, but my goal is to release it mid January because I think all of the things that people, I think earlier before we started recording, I said something along the lines of like, I'm just sort of like living in my own fantasy world where like the elections didn't really happen and it's not really affecting anybody and everybody's doing great, right? But of course I have to like face it, even though I was not, I did vote, but for my own mental health, I knew I could not follow along,
right.
because I was just going to be very upset. But even though I avoided it for my own personal reasons, people I was working with were following along, and it was very important, and I sort of like started following along like during the session. I usually typically work very, my last appointment of the day is 8 p.m because everybody works.
Yeah.
So anyway, so and during that time we were just sort of like following along and talking about the grief and
Mhm.
everything that that was changing for the client. And I kind of had to, as a provider, I had to understand, right? Like, even though it was in my preference, I needed to have at least some understanding of what was happening so I could still be there and create that space that uh, my people needed, like my
Right.
clients needed, to have that. So I cannot be completely ignorant. When I'm not like on Zoom talking to someone, I'm living
Right.
in my own fantasy world,
Yeah, no,
pretending this isn't happening. Um, so then I can have, I can create that space for people who are very anxious about it and have no other choice but to follow. I have a lot of people, like you said, there's some of the people that I've talked to um, do fit into that category where they no longer exist, or they're very much in danger of like deportation or being treated in a very horrible way. So that is like one thing, right? But then on the other hand, you also have people that maybe they don't really fit into that category, but they still feel the grief for
right.
everyone else.
And that's important because, look, I am a cisgender woman.
Hmm.
I live in a heterosexual marriage. I have my citizenship now. Before that, I had my green card, and before that, I had visa, work visa.
Hmm.
Everything. I don't fit into any of the categories of risk.
Hmm.
Well, I'm a woman, and I'm the mother of daughters. But that's about some of it, right?
Hmm.
But I'm looking around and I see all these people that are now going to be hurt. And I see the long term risks because I
Mhm.
know my daughters will face the consequences of this 10 years from now.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm grieving that. It makes sense. What kind, I mean, if you have empathy, you're grieving for people you know who are going to suffer,
Hmm.
right? You don't say, oh, it won't touch me, so it's fine.
Right.
Empathetic grief exists.
Yeah. And I think there's the opposite as well, where eh, we saw this, I think, a lot during COVID, where a lot of people were like really mad of like, why do I have to stop working? Like, I really need that income. Like, like I'm not really affected. Like COVID, like it's not like people are dying, or like it's not like I would die, right? So there was like no understanding of how, sort of like the reason why we needed to get vaccinations until someone in their family had COVID
Right.
or died of COVID. And then
Right.
it became a very urgent thing for everyone to get vaccinated, right?
So what,
And then I'm like, okay, we kind of have to have that understanding again, not black and white. Just because it's not affecting you doesn't mean it's not affecting anyone else,
or
right?
it
So
doesn't, or it's not important.
yes, exactly. So there has to be that sort of understanding. I wanted to hear your opinion on this, because there is a lot of things going on in the world, right?
Hmm.
In the US and in other parts of the world, um, especially online, I have seen a lot of people um, basically release a call to action of people to bring it to an awareness, right? To other people's awareness, especially if you have um, a platform like on social media,
Hmm.
which I think it's okay, but a lot of people really go overboard and then start accusing people. If you're not addressing this particular issue on your social media, you're wrong.
So it depends
Mm,
on what you usually do. So I'm going to give you my own example.
mm,
I know I follow quite a few DI people, diversity, equity, and inclusion,
mhm,
right? If they address every single thing, but they only ignore anti Semitism, which is usually the case, then it
mm,
absolutely does tell me something,
mhm,
right? It absolutely does tell me something. But if they sometimes do and sometimes don't, then I can't say, well, it means that you don't care about this.
mhm,
Because they're not always on social media and they're not always posting and they're not addressing every single thing. So, they randomly, oh, I have 5 minutes now, I'm gonna talk.
mhm,
That's fine. So when you say if you're not doing X, it means you don't care or you're wrong or you're hurting,
mhm.
it depends on the overall activity that you do. And that's very important. You have to consider who you're talking with and what their usual is. So after the seventh, when some people didn't say anything,
Mhm.
I don't. I had opinions about. I want more people to speak up,
Of course.
but but I'm not accusing a certain person because
Mhm,
I know not everybody responds the same way. I do
mhm,
have an issue with people who had nothing to say after the seventh, but the second Israel retaliated, they had plenty to say, and they didn't shut up since. Because I'm like,
yes.
sorry. I'm sorry. This is very selective right now. And
Mhm, mhm,
especially in our field, I'm like, what's going on? Right?
mhm.
I have a problem with people who clearly don't know what they're talking about, but they're talking anyhow.
Yes.
And just
Yes. And
because,
we could have several podcasts dedicated to that, I think.
right? And if you have a big platform, doesn't mean that you know what you're talking about.
Mhm,
So before we go and say, why don't you have a platform? Why don't you talk? I want to know A, if you usually do talk, and B, if you know what you're talking about. Because if you don't, You're probably just following some kind of a trend on TikTok University. And with all due respect, that's not a real university. And you are going to do more harm than good.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so this is something that is just if we it boils really down to a very easy thing that we can employ in a lot of different areas of our life, I think.
Right.
Because the way that I learned it really is when I had a client a few years ago that we were very similar in age. If we had met outside of sessions, we would have become best friends,
Yeah.
but we met in session.
Which
And I
sometimes,
was so sad about that happening. And then so at the end, towards the end, when we were talking about like, hey, I'm leaving, someone else is coming, like, how are you feeling about that? Um, my client said, hey, in a couple of months, can I, because they were very aware that I was very active on social media and I was posting like mental health stuff. And they asked me, can I contact you? And I said, I need to think about it.
right.
Let me think about it. And I went home and think about it. And I wanted to say yes. I was like, okay, after like, I don't know how many months, years, whatever, yes, feel free to contact me. But then I thought about it and I'm like, no, because this is, like I said, someone I can really relate to and we can like become best friends. But what if somebody else that I'm kind of like, no, I would never, like have a friendship like that, like outside of session, asks me about it. I will feel bad because then I said no, right? So in my head, I need to have the same standard for everyone,
But
right? So
again,
then,
depends on the platform, though.
well, then it became once I registered Psychology for Geeks to be a nonprofit. At first, I was doing things for like special events and celebrations and holidays. And then I was like, wait a minute, I'm doing sort of like the well-known ones, right? Like New Year's, Christmas. And like I'm like, what about all the other ones that I have no understanding of? I felt bad for pushing them aside. So I was like, I think this platform is going just going to become a hobbies and mental health sort of thing,
Right.
right? And we're just not going to dive deep because this is supposed to be sort of like a safe space for people. If you come in and talk about it, you are more than welcome to. But we are not going to get involved in all of the political things that are happening, all subtle things, because then we will be really stretched thin. And then we run into the problem of like, but how come you didn't address this one thing, but you did address the other thing, right?
Yeah,
And I'm like, I can't. We cannot.
we cannot. And
Yeah.
here's the thing. I wish we had a standard of speak up when you know what you're talking about.
Yes.
And I wish we had a standard of either don't or do. If you address every other minority and you don't address this one minority, it does mean something. So,
Hmm.
so you know, a little more awareness would be nice.
Yes.
And as for clients on social media, it is inappropriate to contact them on social media. But if a client wants to follow you on Instagram, that's a one side thing, and that's fine.
Yeah, that's what I said. I was like, I cannot like contact you, but if you want to follow me, like that's okay. And like they'll be updated as to what I'll be
Yeah,
doing, but it
sure.
cannot become a
And we
something.
can't engage, but if you wanna, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I want to say issues are typically very complicated, especially when it comes to political things. When it's like a lot more people involved, they become complicated, but at the same time, they're very, very simple,
Yeah,
right? Where it's like we have to have an understanding, like you said, of what is happening before we say anything. And also, we have to understand that just because the powers that be are making decisions, it doesn't mean that the population in general
correct,
agrees with those decisions or is not affected in any way by those decisions, right?
correct,
Even if we have a here a democracy where like the large majority of people vote, like because if you said okay, well the majority voted, in this way, right? And I'm like, yeah, but if you also take into account who is the minority, it is like millions of people. So like it's still a huge thing, right?
And when the
That's
majority
happening.
voted, maybe they didn't anticipate everything that's going to happen in the next 4 years,
True, true, very true.
right? So we're not prophets. I know what maybe you are. I'm not a prophet,
No.
right?
Because I go back and forth and I'm like, I kind of wish I could read minds. It would be so much easier. But I was like, but no, also no.
Only if I can
I
have
don't
an
have that.
on and off button.
Yes. Yes. With the test. Yeah,
Right.
give me all
Yeah.
the answers. Or how can I convince you to give me another scoop of ice cream? Yes. Or to do my chores for me. Oh, imagine the
That's
power.
incepting. That's not mind reading.
Oh,
Mind reading is just a reading.
man. No, I just want magic to be real, so then I can reenact the one scene from the Sword in the Stone, like the old movie where Merlin just gets like all the brooms and like stuff, like he just starts doing chores for Arthur so they can go out and have an adventure. I'm like, I need that in my life. I
But
want magic to be cooking for me and cleaning my room while I focus on the things I actually want to do.
I actually think the best, going all the way back to grief assumption, and everybody has opinions. And I told you sometimes something good can be with grief, come with grief.
Hmm.
My favorite example is both in Smallville and in Supergirl. They
Hmm.
show when the powers manifest for the first time,
Mm.
and it's excruciating. It is horrible. Nobody wants this,
Yes.
but we all look at Superman and Supergirl and we go, "Oh, that's so cool. I wish I had those powers." Don't be so sure. It comes with grief. The grief of
Hmm.
their homeland, their home planet, but also it was excruciating. So I'm going to go all the way to the beginning of this episode and say, don't assume you know something about someone else's experience or grief.
Yeah,
You
just
don't.
because their life looks better doesn't mean it actually is.
Yeah, and just because you would have magic to do all your chores, you don't know the cost. So be careful what you wish for.
Ah, true, true. Man, why can't everything in life be easy? I mean, to a certain extent, I understand why it's so much easy to go into like the black and white sort of like thinking, right? But again, not only are we potentially endangering other people by having that mentality, but also ourselves, right? We're causing
Right,
a lot of damage to ourselves because there is then it becomes a, is it my fault, is it not my fault, is it, should I be over this, should I not get over this, like, like it while sometimes it can be like, well, you're just so stubborn when it comes to like politics, it usually is a lot deeper than that,
right,
right? So like with clients I say, oh, you notice and like this very extreme anxiety symptoms in this one situation and this other one, what about in the rest of your life? And sometimes they say, no, no, it's just those situations. I'm like, is it, like it just doesn't happen? And I'm like, maybe it could be that in the rest of your life you experience that anxiety, but you're so used to it that you don't even notice it anymore.
right. Could be.
And yeah, and it just it becomes like, it boils down like to this very much like black and white sort of thinking, or always blaming ourselves, or wanting to blame other people, or feeling like we have no power to do anything, right? So it's it's complicated, but at the same time not complicated. Well, I am complicating myself, like I'm confusing myself even more, so I am gonna end it there. But okay, so I would love to do tons more videos with you, because I feel like every time you're talking, I'm like, yes, yes, exactly. That's exactly what I'm telling my clients. And I'm like, yes, other people need
I
to
would
know
love
that it's not just me.
I would love that.
Yes. So, but in the meantime, if anybody wanted to reach out to you for a consultation, or potentially becoming a client of yours, or wanting to collaborate with you, where can people find you?
www. sorry, my website is Hope in Grief Therapy. Hope in Grief Therapy. And you can find me there. And I am, if you're in Georgia, I can see you as a client. That's where my license is. Otherwise, I will recommend someone or refer you. If you want to collaborate, you can tell I'm easy. Always happy to collaborate on stuff. If you want to talk TV, I am here. Uh, Also on YouTube, the Hope Culture with Shirley. You find me there. You want to talk to me TV? Come over there. We'll do that. That's not a
Yes,
good idea, actually.
yes. Go over there and talk about these things because I know I followed you on Instagram as well, and I think there was a few videos that you had hinted at, or did I see them on YouTube? I can't remember now. But you talk like your videos are very brief, very to the point, which mine are not. So um, you do talk about like specific scenes
Right. I
and
analyze
grief and like
actions.
dive
Yeah.
a little bit deeper on that. So if you're interested in learning more about grief, whether you're a provider or not, it's a provider or not, I think you'll find it very, very helpful. So check it out. And all that information will also be in the description of this video because I already forgot everything. So for people like me that have ADHD, everything is already in the description. So feel free to check them out. And also feel free to check out our other panel, which I totally forgot what it is called now. I think it's
Taboo
one of our
topics.
taboo panels, where we talk about death and grief as well. Um, so wait, okay, people can find you. All right, so I guess I'll just do the outro. Thank you so much for making it. I really was going to try to make it a 45-minute thing. It did not work out because I was like, no, wait, we have so much more to talk about.
We just need to do this more.
Exactly, that's exactly what it means. So thank you so much for making it to the end. Feel free to recommend and suggest all of these videos to other people. Like, subscribe to our videos so you can see what else is coming up next and the other projects that we'll eventually be working on, and check out the panels that we already have. Also check us out on social media because we have a lot. Well, we recorded this in 2024, but for 2025 we have so many online and in-person events. You really don't want to miss that, so definitely check that out. And don't forget to reframe and re-enchant your life, and we'll see you on the next video. Bye.